This was once one of the most magnificent residences in ancient Rome. It was the home of an important public figure, a senator perhaps. Then suddenly it all disappeared. Archaeological digs have only recently brought to light the remains of this splendid residence. It was so splendid it included its own private thermal baths. There it is, this small oval-shaped pool. Traces of its marble lining are very clear, and it's easy to imagine what it must have been like at the time. Imagine what we would have seen if we'd been guests of our illustrious host, the master of this house. This is what this room must have looked like. It offered a cozy atmosphere overlooked by an interior balcony. On the other side was the large pool with the small one nearby. Perhaps now we have a better idea of what it must have been like to live in such an opulent Roman domus. The staircase led to the upper floor of the villa. Lighting effects help us to fill in the missing parts and to see what it might have looked like at the time. Here it is. The existence of an upper floor proves it must have been a huge and luxurious residence, a fact that's further confirmed by traces of frescoes. Again, we can only imagine what it must have looked like. If we concentrate, we might even hear the sounds of children running up and down the stairs, being chased by anxious servants, afraid the noise might disturb the master of the house and his guests. This house was also owned by a rich and powerful family. It's obvious from the floor. Look. Despite everything, this piece of mosaic has been miraculously preserved. It's an example of extremely fine craftsmanship. Today, we can use lighting to restore it, in a sense. Thanks to a virtual projection, we can even reconstruct the missing parts and appreciate what it once looked like. Mosaics were the carpets of the period. Virtual graphics help us reconstruct the rooms in 3 dimensions. Between their time and ours, the moon has waxed and waned almost 700,000 times over this extraordinary city. Rome never ceases to amaze, especially when it speaks to us, like now, in mysterious and magical places like this.
This map gives us an idea of the extension of the Roman Empire under Trajan. An immense empire, which was completed with the conquest of Dacia, the modern-day Romania. The column directly celebrates this conquest, but this is how it was to be presented in Trajan's time. It was surrounded, much like a precious object, within a protective case of columns. On one side, the gigantic Ulpia Basilica was constructed, and on the other two sides were lower buildings that were most probably libraries. The interesting part is the terraces that allowed one to observe the highest part of the column, as if they were built purposely to better view the scene. And actually, the history told by the bas-reliefs is a kind of long papyrus in marble that is rolled out for more than 200 meters. And it is exactly this story that we now wish to describe. The first scene takes us to the Roman banks of the Danube, on the Dacia border. This pile of wood and these sheaves serve as markers as well as alarms in order to make fires by night and smoke by day. In the control towers, the torches are maintained at a constant burn, allowing to transmit orders. The Roman invasion is about to begin. The ships are loaded for the troop landing. The god Danube emerges from the waters and observes the beginning of the operations. From the gates of the city come legionnaires as they cross the river on a bridge of boats. The first thing to do is to create a proper fortified base. And the legionnaires, who are not only combatants, but engineers, see to its construction in as little time as possible. They dig the foundation and construct the walls in stone. It is a rather well-organized assembly line, and this is the secret of the Romans. Their strength not only lies in their weapons, but also in the organization of a military camp. The Roman cavalry begins its attack. It is a hard-fought and ferocious battle, holding nothing back. Auxiliaries demonstrate some decapitated heads to Trajan. One soldier even continues to fight while holding the head of his enemy between his teeth. An auxiliary of Germanic origin fights bare-chested while brandishing a club. Jupiter, from above, helps the Romans by hurling his thunderbolts. The Dacians, always represented with beards, try in vain to resist the fury of the legionnaires. With a special effects graph, we can render the scene three-dimensional in order to better appreciate the complexity and the realism. One small note. Notice how many characters are sculpted in every detail. There are over 2,500 characters in the column, all bound together in one singular story. There could be no room for error because you can't correct a sculpture, as with a painting. Everything had to be calculated to the millimeter from the very beginning. The Dacian resistance is desperate, but in the end, the deadly Roman war machine is about to take the upper hand. As a result, some Dacians set fire to the city buildings, thus preventing them from falling into the Roman hands. King Decebalo refuses the surrender, but the grip is closing quickly around him. The Roman cavalry gives chase and in the end overwhelms him. Decebalo, by now vanquished, decides to take his own life. At the foot of an oak tree, he slits his throat with his long, curved sword just before he can be apprehended. The enemy king is depicted here with his gesture of extreme pride. It is practically the last scene of our story told by the column. Trajan returns triumphant to Rome. One last surprising item. All of these bas-reliefs were probably not as we see them today. They were in color. Perhaps Romans saw the column 2,000 years ago, as if it were a kind of color film, the first one in history.